You think you have a friend. You laugh together. You share secrets. You celebrate milestones. You assume loyalty. But something feels slightly off. When you succeed, their smile tightens. When you struggle, their energy softens. When you grow, they subtly distance themselves. When you shine, they change the subject. You tell yourself you are overthinking, but you are not. Buddhism teaches that suffering does not only arise from enemies, it also arises from attachment, comparison, and ego, even inside friendship. Not every friend who competes with you is evil. Most are unconscious. They are fighting their own insecurity. They are measuring themselves against you without realizing it. And if you do not understand this dynamic, you will suffer unnecessarily. Today, we are going to examine the hidden competition inside friendship, not to make you paranoid, not to make you bitter, but to make you wise. Because awareness protects your peace. 1. Comparison is the root of hidden rivalry. The Buddha taught that craving creates suffering. What most people do not realize is that comparison is a refined form of craving. It is the craving to be ahead, to be validated, to feel superior, or at least not inferior. The moment the mind whispers, "Why them and not me?" suffering has already begun. That single thought seems small, harmless, almost automatic, but inside it lives jealousy, insecurity, fear, and ego. It is the seed of rivalry. In friendship, comparison is especially dangerous because friendship is supposed to feel safe. When you are with a friend, you expect support, ease, understanding. But if comparison enters the space, something shifts. The energy tightens. Conversations become measured. Success becomes complicated. A friend can genuinely care about you and still compare themselves to you. These two things can coexist. This is what makes it confusing. The human ego constantly measures. It measures status, income, relationships, attention, intelligence, attractiveness, influence. Even spirituality can become a competition. Who is more disciplined? Who is more enlightened? Who is more admired? The ego wants position. So imagine this. You receive praise in front of others. People congratulate you. They admire your progress. Outwardly, your friend smiles. They say the right words. But internally, their mind may whisper, "Am I falling behind? Am I less impressive now?" This is not because they hate you. It is because the ego feels threatened. When you achieve something, first marriage, career success, recognition, personal growth, their mind may quietly ask, "Why wasn't that me? What am I doing wrong? Am I inferior?" The pain of comparison does not come from your success. It comes from their identification with status. Comparison turns companionship into competition. And here is the hard truth. Most rivalry in friendship is silent. No one says, "I see you as my competitor." Instead, it shows up subtly. They downplay your achievements. They change the topic when you share good news. They highlight their own wins immediately after yours. They become distant when you rise. It is rarely dramatic. It is tension you can feel but cannot prove. That tension exists because comparison is happening beneath the surface. The Buddha's teaching on suffering begins with understanding the mind. The mind does not just experience reality, it interprets it. When your friend sees your success, they do not just see your success. They interpret it in relation to themselves. If they are secure, they think, "That's wonderful for them." If they are insecure, they think, "What does this say about me?" Do you see the difference? The event is the same. The interpretation creates the suffering. But here is where it becomes even more important. You are not immune to this either. Be honest with yourself. Have you ever felt slightly uncomfortable when a friend surpassed you? Have you ever minimized their success internally? Have you ever thought, "I should be further than them"? If you have, then you understand how natural comparison is. The Buddha did not teach us to judge ourselves for having ego. He taught us to observe it. The antidote to comparison is awareness. Not denial, not suppression, awareness. If you sense rivalry from a friend, do not react immediately. Do not accuse. Do not escalate. Observe. Notice patterns calmly. Does their support disappear when you grow? Do they subtly compete in every conversation? Do they seem energized by your struggles but distant during your victories? Observation gives you clarity without emotional chaos. But you must also observe yourself. When your friend succeeds, watch your inner reaction. Is there joy or is there tension? If there is tension, do not justify it. Do not blame them. Simply acknowledge comparison is arising. When you name it, you weaken it. Comparison thrives in unconsciousness. It fades in awareness. Understand this deeply. Competition fades when comparison dissolves. If you stop measuring yourself against others, their growth no longer threatens you, and if they continue comparing, you no longer participate. Imagine two people standing side by side. If one steps forward, the other may feel left behind, but this feeling only exists if they believe they are racing. Friendship is not a race. Life is not a scoreboard, but the ego turns everything into one. The Buddhist path invites you to step off the scoreboard entirely. When you do not define your worth by being ahead or behind, comparison loses its fuel. Then, something beautiful happens. You can genuinely celebrate others. You can grow without guilt. You can detach from rivalry without resentment. And if a friend continues to compete with you, you remain steady. Their insecurity no longer infects your peace. This is the real power of understanding comparison. It shifts your focus from, why are they acting this way, to, how does the mind create suffering through measurement? Once you see this clearly, you stop taking subtle rivalry personally. You understand, they are not fighting you, they are fighting their own self-image. And if you are wise, you will not join that fight. You will step back, remain aware, and protect your inner stability. Because the greatest freedom is this: to see comparison arise and refuse to feed it. That is where hidden rivalry loses its power. And that is where peace begins. 2. Ego wants superiority, not equality. Friendship is meant to be horizontal. Two people walking side by side. No hierarchy, no ranking, no silent scoreboard. But the ego does not like equality. The ego wants position. It wants to feel slightly ahead, slightly admired, slightly more accomplished. It wants reassurance that it is valuable. And the easiest way for the ego to feel valuable is comparison with others. In friendship, this creates a subtle but powerful distortion. As long as you and your friend appear equal, similar income, similar progress, similar recognition, everything feels stable. There is no threat. The balance is comfortable. But the moment the balance shifts, the ego reacts. If you start earning more, gaining more attention, improving yourself, becoming more confident, more disciplined, more spiritually grounded, something changes. Not necessarily in the friendship itself, but in the ego, because now the ego feels lower in the invisible hierarchy, and the ego does not tolerate feeling lower. This is why some friendships feel effortless during struggle, but tense during growth. When you were confused, insecure, or stuck, the dynamic was safe. No one felt inferior. No one felt overshadowed. But when you rise, the ego of the other person may whisper, "I'm losing ground." This is not always conscious. Most people are not sitting there thinking, "I must compete with my friend." It is subtler than that. They may interrupt you more. They may subtly correct you. They may highlight their own accomplishments immediately after yours. They may question your decisions in ways that feel unnecessary. Why? Because the ego seeks restoration of superiority. It tries to rebalance the perceived hierarchy. The Buddha's teaching on non-self directly challenges this dynamic. He taught that the self we defend so fiercely is a mental construction, a story, a collection of thoughts, memories, labels, and identities. I am the successful one. I am the smarter one. I am the confident one. I am the stable one. When your growth threatens one of these identities, the ego feels attacked, not because you attacked them, but because reality no longer matches their internal story. So, the ego compensates, sometimes through competition, sometimes through subtle dismissal, sometimes through quiet resentment. You might notice this shift and feel confused. They used to support me. Why do they seem uncomfortable now? The answer is simple. Your growth disrupted their internal ranking system. The ego measures worth through comparison. If you rise, it assumes they fall. But this assumption is false. Life is not a ladder with limited space at the top. Your success does not remove theirs. Your light does not reduce theirs. Yet the ego does not operate on logic. It operates on fear. Fear of being irrelevant. Fear of being outshined. Fear of losing importance. And when fear drives behavior, competition follows. Now here is the uncomfortable part. You must examine your own ego as well. Do you feel slightly superior when you improve? Do you enjoy being the more disciplined one? The more stable one? The more spiritually aware one? If so, your ego is playing the same game just from a different position. The Buddhist path is not about switching roles in the hierarchy. It is about abandoning the hierarchy altogether. Real friendship does not require one person to feel above the other. It requires mutual respect without measurement. If you sense that a friend needs to feel superior to stay comfortable, you have a decision to make. You can shrink yourself to preserve their ego, or you can grow without apology. Shrinking may preserve the relationship temporarily, but it damages you. Growing may create tension, but it preserves your integrity. The middle path is this: grow humbly. Do not flaunt progress. Do not weaponize success. Do not speak from superiority. But do not dim yourself either. Remain steady. If they respond with insecurity, that insecurity belongs to them. You cannot manage another person's ego. You can only manage your own. The Buddha warned repeatedly about identification with status and identity. The moment you cling to being better or ahead, you suffer. And the moment someone else clings to that identity, they suffer when it is challenged. This is why ego-driven friendships feel unstable. They depend on balance, and balance inevitably shifts. One day, you rise. Another day, they rise. If either of you needs superiority to feel secure, rivalry will surface again and again. But if both of you release the need to rank, something different happens. You stop measuring. You stop proving. You stop subtly asserting dominance in conversation. You begin to celebrate without fear. That is rare. Most people are not free from ego. Most friendships contain subtle hierarchy. But awareness changes the dynamic. When you understand that ego wants superiority, you stop personalizing strange behavior. If a friend becomes cold when you succeed, you do not immediately assume betrayal. You recognize ego at work. You remain calm. You stay grounded. You refuse to enter a silent competition. And sometimes, as your stability remains steady, their ego relaxes because they realize you are not trying to dominate them. Other times, distance naturally forms. And that is not tragedy. That is alignment. The deeper lesson here is simple but difficult. If a friendship depends on you staying small, it was never balanced. True equality does not fear growth. True friendship does not require one person to remain behind. When ego dissolves, competition dissolves. And when competition dissolves, friendship becomes peaceful again. Not because one person won, but because neither person is trying to. 3. Attachment creates possessiveness. Not all competition between friends is about success. Sometimes it is about control. Sometimes it is about attention. And sometimes it is about fear of being replaced. Attachment in friendship can look like loyalty. It can look like closeness. It can look like deep bonding. But beneath it, there is often a silent expectation. You are my person. You should prioritize me. You should stay the same. The problem is not love. The problem is possession. The Buddha warned that attachment leads to suffering because we try to hold what is constantly changing. We cling to roles, dynamics, and identities as if they are permanent. But nothing is permanent. Not you, not your friend, not the structure of your relationship. When you begin to grow, evolve, meet new people, or shift priorities, attachment feels threatened. If your friend is attached to the version of you that existed before the one who needed them more, depended on them more, spent more time with them, your growth feels like abandonment. And when attachment feels abandoned, it reacts. It may not react openly. It may react through subtle competition. They may compete for your time. They may make you feel guilty for expanding your circle. They may criticize the new direction you are taking. They may question your new friendships. This is not always jealousy of success. It is fear of losing emotional territory. Attachment says, "You belong in this space with me." Growth says, "I am expanding beyond this space." The conflict begins there. Possessiveness in friendship is rarely discussed, but it is common. A friend who is attached does not want to lose their position in your life. They may have defined part of their identity through the relationship. If I am not their closest friend, who am I? If they don't need me the same way, what is my role? Attachment creates dependency on roles. And when roles shift, insecurity arises. Now understand this carefully. There is nothing wrong with valuing a friendship deeply. There is nothing wrong with loving someone. But attachment becomes unhealthy when it demands that the other person remain fixed. You are not meant to stay the same to preserve someone's comfort. You are meant to evolve. If a friend becomes competitive when you invest energy elsewhere in your goals, your family, your spiritual practice, it may not be rivalry in the traditional sense. It may be a struggle for emotional control. They may unconsciously try to pull you back into old patterns. They may remind you of who you used to be. They may say, "You've changed," as if change is betrayal. But change is natural. The Buddha's teaching of impermanence is essential here. Everything changes. If a relationship cannot adapt to change, it tightens into attachment. Attachment fears loss. Possessiveness fears independence. And both can turn into subtle competition. They may try to prove they matter more than your new priorities. They may try to compete with your goals for your attention. But here is where you must be honest with yourself as well. Have you ever felt uneasy when a friend became close to someone else? Have you ever felt a small discomfort when their attention shifted away from you? That is attachment too. It does not make you bad. It makes you human. But awareness is the difference between unconscious reaction and conscious growth. If you recognize attachment in yourself, you can release it gently. You can remind yourself, they are not mine to possess. They are free. Freedom is the foundation of healthy friendship. If a bond requires control, it will eventually suffocate. True connection allows expansion. It allows new friendships, new interests, new stages of life. It does not shrink when growth occurs. It adapts. When you sense possessiveness from a friend, do not respond with hostility, but do not surrender your evolution either. You can reassure without regressing. You can maintain connection without abandoning growth. But if the attachment is too strong, you may notice increasing tension, because attachment does not negotiate easily. It clings, and clinging creates suffering for both people. The Buddhist path encourages non-attachment, not because love is wrong, but because clinging distorts love. When you release possessiveness, something powerful happens. You stop competing for attention. You stop measuring importance. You stop fearing replacement, and you allow the relationship to breathe. If it survives that freedom, it is genuine. If it collapses without control, it was never stable. Understand this clearly. A friend who competes for your attention is often afraid, not malicious. But fear-driven attachment can still create rivalry. Your responsibility is not to manage their fear. Your responsibility is to remain centered. Grow without guilt. Connect without control. And, if necessary, step back from dynamics that require you to stay small to keep someone comfortable. Because friendship rooted in freedom will never need possession. And friendship rooted in possession will always feel like competition. Choose freedom. That is where peace lives. 4. Insecurity hides behind politeness. Not all competition looks aggressive. It does not always come with open jealousy, harsh words, or obvious sabotage. Most of the time, it hides behind politeness. It hides behind smiles. It hides behind "I'm happy for you." And that is what makes it difficult to detect. A person who is insecure rarely announces it. Insecurity is quiet. It protects itself. It avoids exposure. It fears being seen as inadequate. So instead of saying, Your success makes me uncomfortable, it says, "Wow, that's nice," with a tone that feels slightly off. Instead of admitting, "I feel threatened," it jokes, "Must be nice being perfect." Instead of openly competing, it subtly minimizes. This is how insecurity survives through subtle behavior. You may notice that when you share good news, their enthusiasm feels delayed or forced. They may quickly redirect the conversation back to themselves. They may compare their own experience immediately. They may respond with advice you didn't ask for, as if your success needs correction. These behaviors are small, but repeated patterns reveal truth. Insecurity cannot tolerate feeling inferior, and because it fears direct confrontation, it expresses itself indirectly. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from identification. When someone identifies strongly with an image of themselves intelligent, successful, admired, your growth can threaten that image. If you surpass them in an area they once felt secure in, their self-concept shakes. And the mind resists that shaking. So instead of celebrating fully, they protect their identity. They may look for flaws in your success. They may question how sustainable it is. They may subtly imply that luck played a role. They may withhold full praise. This is not random. It is self-protection. Now, here is the important distinction. Insecurity does not always mean someone is toxic, but unmanaged insecurity creates toxic patterns. A secure friend feels expanded by your growth. An insecure friend feels diminished by it. And this difference changes everything. When someone is secure, your success inspires them. They see it as proof that growth is possible. They feel no reduction in their own worth. When someone is insecure, your success becomes a mirror reflecting what they believe they lack. That reflection hurts. And instead of addressing their internal pain, they adjust their external behavior. Sometimes they become colder. Sometimes they become overly critical. Sometimes they subtly compete in unrelated areas to regain balance. If you sense this shift, your first instinct might be confusion. Why do I feel tension when I'm doing well? But tension is often the emotional signal of comparison combined with insecurity. You must approach this with clarity, not paranoia. Do not assume insecurity from one isolated moment. Observe patterns calmly. The Buddhist path emphasizes mindful awareness, steady observation without emotional reaction. Watch how they respond to your wins over time. Are they consistent in support? Or does their energy change when you rise? Do they celebrate publicly but distance privately? Do they highlight your mistakes more than your improvements? Patterns reveal insecurity more than words do. Now let us go deeper. Insecurity is rooted in self-doubt. A person who doubts their own worth constantly looks outward for confirmation. They need to feel better than someone to feel stable. If you become that someone, they may unconsciously attempt to rebalance the scale. But understand this clearly. Their insecurity is not your responsibility to fix. You can be compassionate without absorbing their discomfort. Compassion means recognizing they are struggling internally. It does not mean shrinking yourself to protect them. Some people expect you to dim your light so their insecurity stays hidden. They feel comfortable when you are equal or slightly behind. They feel unsettled when you move ahead. If you begin to minimize your success to keep them comfortable, you are feeding their insecurity and betraying your own growth. The Buddha did not teach self-erasure for the comfort of others. He taught detachment from ego, not detachment from progress. You can remain humble without becoming small. Humility is internal. Smallness is self-suppression. Do not confuse the two. If you sense insecurity behind politeness, your role is simple. Remain calm. Remain grounded. Do not boast. Do not provoke. But do not retreat either. Over time, one of two things will happen. Either they will confront their insecurity and mature, allowing the friendship to stabilize, or the tension will grow, revealing that the foundation was fragile. Both outcomes provide clarity. The deeper lesson here is this: politeness is not always peace. Silence is not always support. Smiles are not always sincerity. Look at behavior over time, not isolated moments. And most importantly, examine your own insecurity as well. Do you ever disguise comparison behind polite language? Do you ever withhold praise when someone surpasses you? Self-awareness is the highest protection. When you dissolve insecurity within yourself, you stop participating in subtle rivalry. And when you stop participating, insecurity loses its leverage over you. You cannot control whether others feel threatened by your growth, but you can control whether you internalize their discomfort. Insecurity thrives when unexamined. It softens when exposed to awareness. And once you understand that insecurity hides behind politeness, you stop being confused by subtle tension. You see it clearly, not with anger, not with superiority, but with understanding. And that understanding protects your peace, because you no longer mistake insecurity for betrayal. You recognize it as suffering, and you choose not to absorb it. 5. Your own ego can join the game. Before you point at your friend, pause. Before you conclude that they are insecure, competitive, or threatened, look inward, because rivalry in friendship is rarely one-sided. The ego does not only exist in them, it exists in you. And if you are honest, you will admit that sometimes you feel it too. You feel a subtle irritation when they succeed in something you value. You feel slightly overlooked when they receive praise. You feel competitive when they improve in an area where you once felt ahead. You may not act on it. You may hide it well, but it is there. That is ego. The Buddha did not teach us to analyze others first. He taught self-observation. When rivalry appears in friendship, ask yourself a difficult question. Am I fully free from comparison? If the answer is no, and for most people it is no, then you are participating in the same dynamic you criticize. The ego wants recognition. It wants to feel significant. It wants to be seen as special. And when someone close to you shines, your ego may interpret that as a reduction in your own importance, even if you genuinely love them. This is uncomfortable to admit, but growth requires honesty. Sometimes you are not just the target of hidden competition. Sometimes you are part of it. You may subtly try to reassert your position. You may highlight your own strengths after they share theirs. You may mentally compare your progress and reassure yourself that you are still ahead in some area. This is the mind protecting identity. The identity might be, I am the smarter one, or I am the more disciplined one, or I am the more spiritually aware one. When that identity feels threatened, ego activates. But here is the deeper truth. If your worth depends on being ahead of your friend, your worth is unstable. True confidence does not need comparison. True growth does not need competition. The Buddhist teaching of non-self challenges the entire structure of ego identity. The self that wants to win is constructed from labels and stories. When you cling to being better, you become fragile. Because the moment someone surpasses you, your identity shakes. And then what? Then you compete, even if it is silent, even if it is subtle, even if it is hidden behind kindness. This is why some friendships slowly turn into quiet battlegrounds. Both people are protecting identities. Both people are measuring. Both people are pretending not to measure. And tension grows. Now imagine something different. Imagine you genuinely celebrate your friend's success without calculating what it means about you. Imagine their progress inspires you rather than threatens you. Imagine you feel stable even when they outperform you. That stability comes from inner sufficiency. Inner sufficiency means your worth is not based on comparison. It is based on alignment with your own path. When you are anchored in your own direction, someone else's speed does not disturb you. You understand that life is not synchronized. You are not racing side by side toward the same finish line. You are walking different paths that occasionally intersect. The ego wants to compete because it believes resources are limited. Limited admiration, limited success, limited validation. But life does not operate that way. Their growth does not reduce your potential. Their light does not dim yours. Only your ego creates that illusion. This is why the most powerful way to dissolve rivalry is not by confronting them first. It is by dissolving ego within yourself. When you stop competing internally, you stop projecting competition externally. You stop scanning for signs that they are threatened. You stop reacting defensively. You stop escalating subtle tension. You simply remain steady. And here is the interesting part. When you are no longer competing, insecure people feel less threatened by you, because competition requires two participants. If you refuse to enter the game weakens. Sometimes it ends. Other times, you realize that the friendship was built on subtle rivalry from the beginning. And that clarity allows you to step back without bitterness. But none of this happens unless you are willing to examine yourself. It is easy to say, "They are jealous." It is harder to ask, "Do I need to be superior?" It is easy to say, "They can't handle my growth." It is harder to ask, "Am I attached to being ahead?" The Buddhist path is uncomfortable because it demands self-awareness before blame. If you want friendships free from rivalry, you must become a person who does not need to win. You must find satisfaction in your own progress, independent of comparison. You must celebrate others without secretly calculating your position. That is maturity. That is stability. And that is freedom. When your ego no longer needs superiority, you stop fueling hidden competition. You become calm in the presence of success, yours or theirs. And in that calmness, real friendship finally has space to breathe. Because the moment you stop competing internally, rivalry loses its foundation. And what remains is either genuine connection or honest distance. Both are better than silent war. 6. Growth changes social dynamics. One of the hardest truths to accept is this: not every friendship is meant to survive your evolution. In the beginning, friendships often form around similarity, similar struggles, similar ambitions, similar habits, similar levels of awareness. You connect because you understand each other's current reality. You share the same pace, the same mindset, the same stage of life. But growth is not synchronized. One person may decide to become disciplined. Another may stay comfortable. One may pursue self-awareness. Another may avoid introspection. One may build, expand, evolve. Another may resist change. When growth is uneven, the dynamic shifts, and most people are not prepared for that shift. The Buddha taught impermanence, that everything changes. But intellectually understanding change and emotionally accepting it are two different things. When you begin to grow spiritually, emotionally, financially, intellectually, you begin to see differently. You prioritize differently. You tolerate less. You expect more from yourself. And that new version of you no longer fits perfectly into old patterns. If your friendship was built on shared complaints, you may no longer enjoy complaining. If it was built on mutual insecurity, your confidence disrupts the bond. If it was built on similar limitations, your progress creates contrast. Contrast creates discomfort. And discomfort often turns into subtle competition. Why? Because growth exposes gaps. If you become more disciplined, your friend may feel lazy by comparison, even if you never criticize them. If you become emotionally mature, they may feel reactive in contrast. If you become financially successful, they may feel stagnant. Your growth becomes a mirror. And mirrors are uncomfortable when someone does not like what they see. So instead of addressing their own stagnation, they may unconsciously attempt to rebalance the dynamic. They may downplay your progress. They may mock your new habits. They may tempt you back into old behaviors. They may say, "You've changed," with a tone that implies accusation. But here is the reality. You have changed. And you are supposed to. Growth is not betrayal. But to someone who remains in the same place, your evolution can feel like abandonment. This is where many people make a mistake. They slow their growth to preserve comfort. They hide ambition. They avoid speaking about progress. They participate in old habits to maintain harmony. In the short term, this preserves the friendship. In the long term, it creates resentment, because shrinking yourself to keep others comfortable eventually suffocates you. The Buddhist path does not encourage arrogance in growth. It encourages steady evolution without attachment to approval. If your growth disturbs someone, you must ask a difficult question. Is the tension coming from my ego or from their resistance? If you are humble and grounded, yet still face discomfort from them, the issue is likely misalignment. Misalignment does not mean hatred. It means you are no longer walking at the same pace. Some friendships are seasonal. They serve you during a specific phase of life. But when the phase ends, clinging to the relationship out of nostalgia creates suffering. Impermanence applies to people as well. This is painful to accept because we like to believe that loyalty means permanence. But loyalty does not require stagnation. Real friendship adapts to growth. If both individuals grow even at different speeds and support each other's evolution, the bond deepens. But if one grows while the other resists, tension becomes inevitable. And that tension often disguises itself as competition. They may try to prove they are still ahead in some area. They may search for weaknesses in your progress. They may subtly compete to restore equilibrium. But the real issue is not rivalry. It is divergence. You are no longer aligned in direction. Now here is the critical insight. Growth will always test your relationships. If a friendship survives your evolution, it is strong. If it collapses under your progress, it was conditional. And conditional relationships often depend on balance, not authenticity. You cannot prevent this entirely. You cannot grow and remain exactly the same. You cannot elevate without changing dynamics. The only control you have is how you respond. Do not become arrogant in growth. Do not weaponize progress. Do not belittle those who remain where they are. But also do not regress to preserve comfort. Walk your path steadily. If someone chooses to walk beside you, welcome it. If someone falls behind, bless them silently and continue. Because forcing alignment where it no longer exists creates deeper suffering than accepting divergence. The Buddha's teaching of impermanence is not cold. It is liberating. It allows you to release relationships with understanding rather than resentment. When you understand that growth changes social dynamics, you stop being shocked by tension. You stop personalizing distance. You stop fighting to preserve what naturally evolves. And you realize something powerful. Sometimes competition in friendship is not about ego. It is about two people growing in different directions. And no amount of loyalty can override that reality. Acceptance brings peace. Resistance creates suffering. Choose acceptance. Let growth reveal who truly walks with you and who was only meant for an earlier version of you. 7. Choose peace over winning. At the end of all this analysis, comparison, ego, insecurity, attachment, growth, one question remains. What are you going to do about it? You can detect hidden competition in a friendship. You can understand where it comes from. You can even identify your own ego within it. But if you respond by trying to win, you have learned nothing. The ego loves turning awareness into ammunition. Oh, they're insecure? Fine, I'll show them how far ahead I am. That is not wisdom. That is escalation. The Buddha's teaching always returns to one principle. Suffering ends when craving ends. Competition is craving. It is the craving to prove, to dominate, to be recognized, to stand above. If you sense that a friend is competing with you, your ego will want to respond. It will want to outperform them deliberately. It will want to subtly display superiority. It will want to gather validation from others to reinforce your position. But ask yourself honestly, if you win, what do you actually gain? Temporary satisfaction, a fragile sense of superiority, and a damaged relationship. You do not need to defeat your friend. You need to detach from the battlefield. Because once friendship becomes a scoreboard, nobody feels safe anymore. Every conversation becomes performance. Every success becomes comparison. Every failure becomes relief for the other. That is not connection. That is silent war. Choosing peace means stepping out of the game entirely. It means you stop measuring. It means you stop reacting to subtle jabs. It means you stop trying to correct their perception of you. You remain steady, calm, unbothered. This does not mean you tolerate disrespect. Peace is not passivity. If competition becomes toxic, if they openly undermine you, belittle you, or sabotage you, then clarity is required. Boundaries are required. But boundaries can be established without ego. You can calmly say less. You can share less. You can reduce access. You can create emotional distance, not to punish, but to protect your peace. There is strength in restraint. Many people think strength is dominance. In Buddhist wisdom, strength is non-reactivity. If someone tries to provoke subtle rivalry and you refuse to engage, they lose their leverage. If they brag to trigger comparison and you respond with calm indifference, the game collapses. If they attempt to compete and you do not compete back, tension weakens. Competition requires participation. Without your ego feeding it, it fades. And here is something deeper. Sometimes your calmness will expose their insecurity so clearly that they are forced to confront it. Not because you attack them, but because you refuse to fight. Other times, your peace will create distance. And that distance will reveal that the relationship was sustained only by rivalry. Either outcome is clarity. The real victory is not proving you are ahead. The real victory is maintaining inner balance. Because what most people do not realize is this: when you enter competition with a friend, even if you win externally, you lose internally. Your mind becomes restless. You begin anticipating their reactions. You begin strategizing your image. You begin protecting your status. Peace disappears. And without peace, what was the point of winning? The Buddhist path is the middle way. Not submission, not aggression. Calm detachment. You neither shrink yourself to protect their ego, nor inflate yourself to dominate. You walk steadily. You succeed quietly. You let your actions speak without commentary. And if someone feels threatened by your growth, you do not carry their discomfort. You release it. This is emotional maturity. It takes discipline to not respond when provoked. It takes awareness to not compete when challenged. It takes confidence to grow without announcing it. But that discipline is freedom, because when you no longer need to win, you cannot be manipulated. When you no longer need to prove, you cannot be destabilized. When you no longer measure your worth through comparison, rivalry loses its grip. Some friendships will transform when you choose peace. Some will dissolve. Both outcomes are better than living in quiet tension. The hidden competition in friendship is a test, not of your success, but of your ego. Will you fight for superiority, or will you choose inner stability? Winning against a friend is a hollow victory. Maintaining peace within yourself is lasting power. So if you sense competition, do not rush to confront. Do not rush to outperform. Do not rush to defend. Pause. Observe. Detach. Then choose the response that protects your mind, not your pride. Because in the end, the greatest Buddhist warning is not about competitive friends. It is about the ego that wants to compete back. Conquer that, and no rivalry can disturb you. That is peace. And that is the only victory that matters. 8. Not everyone who walks with you is meant to stay. There is a painful realization that most people resist for years. Some friendships are temporary, not because someone betrayed you. Not because someone became evil, but because alignment changes. In the beginning, you and your friend may have shared the same mindset, the same habits, the same level of awareness. You connected easily because your values overlapped, your pace matched, your direction was similar. But people evolve, and evolution is rarely synchronized. One person becomes disciplined, the other remains comfortable. One becomes introspective. The other avoids self-examination. One grows quieter and more focused. The other grows louder and more reactive. At first, the gap is small. Then it widens. And slowly, the connection feels strained. This is where hidden competition often intensifies, not because either of you planned it, but because misalignment creates discomfort. When two people are no longer aligned in direction, comparison increases. They begin noticing differences more than similarities. They begin measuring who is ahead, who is behind. They begin defending their choices instead of simply living them. This is not always hostility. Sometimes it is confusion. Sometimes it is sadness. Sometimes it is the ego resisting impermanence. The Buddha's teaching on impermanence is not just about aging or death. It applies to relationships, too. Everything changes. Expecting every friendship to remain the same forever is attachment. And attachment leads to suffering. If you cling to a version of a friend that no longer exists, you will feel constant friction. If they cling to an older version of you, they will feel the same. Many people try to force continuity. They ignore tension. They dismiss subtle rivalry. They pretend nothing has shifted. But pretending does not restore alignment. Sometimes hidden competition is simply a signal that two paths are diverging. And divergence is not betrayal. It is reality. You cannot evolve and remain exactly where you started. Growth requires shedding old patterns. And sometimes, shedding old patterns means shedding old dynamics. This is difficult because we associate longevity with loyalty. If we've been friends for years, we must stay friends forever. But time alone does not guarantee alignment. You can share history and still grow in different directions. When this happens, one of two responses emerges. Either both individuals consciously adapt to each other's growth, or tension builds until distance becomes unavoidable. If both people respect evolution, the friendship transforms. It becomes less about constant closeness and more about mutual respect. There is space. There is understanding. There is no pressure to remain identical. But if one person resists change, they may interpret your growth as abandonment. And that interpretation fuels competition. They may try to prove they are still ahead. They may criticize your new direction. They may subtly test your loyalty. But here is the truth. You are not obligated to stay the same for someone else's comfort. You are not required to freeze your evolution to preserve familiarity. Growth is not arrogance. It is alignment with your potential. The mistake many people make is trying to drag others along forcefully. They preach. They advise constantly. They attempt to fix their friend. This creates more resistance. Everyone awakens at their own pace. If someone chooses stagnation, that is their path. Your responsibility is not to rescue them. Your responsibility is to remain authentic to your own growth. The Buddhist path emphasizes non-attachment, not because relationships are meaningless, but because clinging creates suffering. When you release the expectation that every friend must remain forever, you experience relief. You allow people to flow in and out of your life naturally. Some will walk beside you for decades. Some will walk beside you for a season. Some will teach you painful lessons. Some will reflect your own ego back to you. And all of them serve a purpose. When hidden competition arises repeatedly, ask yourself calmly, is this insecurity? Is this ego? Or is this misalignment? If it is misalignment, forcing closeness will only deepen discomfort. Sometimes the most peaceful decision is quiet distance, not dramatic confrontation, not emotional explosion, just gradual detachment, less sharing, less expectation, less emotional dependency. Distance does not always mean resentment. It can mean maturity. It can mean acceptance. It can mean recognizing that both of you deserve environments that match your direction. There is dignity in letting go without hostility. There is wisdom in recognizing when a chapter has ended. The fear of loneliness often keeps people clinging to misaligned friendships. But staying in quiet rivalry is lonelier than walking alone. When you accept that not everyone who walks with you is meant to stay, you stop fighting reality. You stop personalizing every shift. You stop trying to preserve dynamics that have naturally expired. And something surprising happens. You become lighter because you are no longer carrying relationships that require you to defend your growth. You are no longer navigating constant subtle tension. You are free to move at your true pace. Some people will remain. Those who remain without competing, without measuring, without resisting your evolution, Those are rare. Those are aligned. And those are the friendships worth nurturing deeply. The rest? Release them with gratitude. They were part of your journey, but they were not the destination. Impermanence is not cruelty. It is clarity. And when you accept that, hidden competition loses its power because you no longer cling to keeping everyone beside you. You simply walk your path, and those meant to walk with you will do so without rivalry, without fear, without ego. That is peace, and peace is worth more than forced loyalty. 9. True friendship is rooted in inner security. At the deepest level, hidden competition in friendship is not about success, money, recognition, or attention. It is about security. A secure person does not feel reduced by your growth. A secure person does not experience your achievements as a personal threat. A secure person understands that your path and their path are not competing lanes on the same road, but entirely separate journeys unfolding at their own pace. When security is present, comparison weakens naturally because there is no need to measure worth against someone else. In Buddhism, much of suffering arises from mistaken identity, from clinging to labels, roles, and narratives about who we are. When someone defines themselves through status, intelligence, attractiveness, or achievement, they become fragile. The moment another person excels in that same area, their sense of self feels unstable. But when someone understands that identity is fluid, impermanent, and not the foundation of true worth, they do not panic when others grow. They remain steady because their value is not built on being ahead. True friendship can only exist between two people who are secure enough not to compete for superiority. Without inner security, every interaction becomes a subtle evaluation. Conversations turn into comparisons. Achievements become silent tests. Compliments feel like transactions. Instead of mutual encouragement, there is quiet tension. Instead of celebration, there is guarded approval. This is what happens when insecurity drives connection. A secure friend celebrates you without calculating what your success means about them. They do not need to immediately mention their own achievements to rebalance the scale. They do not feel the urge to minimize your progress to protect their ego. They do not secretly hope for your failure to feel relief. They experience your growth as something separate from their identity. This separation is emotional maturity. Inner security comes from self-acceptance. It comes from knowing your strengths and weaknesses without exaggerating either. It comes from understanding that life is not a zero-sum game. When you accept yourself fully, you stop needing to be superior. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop feeling threatened by someone else's rise. This is the state from which genuine friendship can thrive. If you look honestly at relationships that feel peaceful, you will notice something consistent. There is no scoreboard. There is no subtle hierarchy. There is no anxiety about who is ahead. There is mutual respect without measurement. Each person is focused on their own development, and that focus removes the need to compare constantly. When comparison fades, rivalry has no foundation. The problem is that many people seek friendship to compensate for insecurity. They look for people who make them feel validated. They surround themselves with those who are slightly behind in certain areas so they can feel stable. This creates fragile bonds. The moment the dynamic shifts, the insecurity surfaces. If the friendship depended on one person feeling superior, it cannot survive equality, and it certainly cannot survive reversal. Buddhist wisdom teaches that stability comes from within, not from external positioning. When you cultivate inner stability through self-awareness, discipline, and acceptance, you become less reactive to shifts in status. You do not feel shaken when someone overtakes you. You do not feel inflated when you overtake someone else. You remain centered because your worth is not fluctuating with comparison. This inner stability also changes how you respond to competitive behavior. If a friend tries to subtly compete with you and you are secure, you do not interpret it as a declaration of war. You recognize it as insecurity. You do not rush to defend your position. You do not escalate. You do not shrink. You simply remain grounded. That grounded energy either calms the dynamic or reveals that the connection cannot function without rivalry. The difficult truth is that secure friendships are rare because secure individuals are rare. Most people are still negotiating their identity through comparison. Most people are still attaching worth to external metrics. This is why hidden competition is common. It is not because people are evil. It is because people are uncertain about themselves. If you want peaceful friendships, the first task is not to search for perfect friends. The first task is to become internally secure. When you no longer need to be ahead, you naturally gravitate toward those who feel the same. When you stop tolerating rivalry, you attract stability. When you release ego-driven dynamics, you begin to recognize who is capable of authentic connection. There is also another layer to understand. Sometimes we misinterpret ordinary ambition as competition. A secure friend may pursue excellence without intending to compete with you at all. If you are insecure, you may perceive their growth as a challenge. This is why self-examination is critical. Ask yourself whether you are projecting rivalry onto someone who is simply living their life. True security removes the urge to interpret everything through the lens of comparison. In the end, the goal is not to eliminate ambition or achievement. It is to eliminate ego attachment to superiority. You can grow, succeed, and excel without turning life into a contest. You can support others while advancing yourself. These are not opposing forces. They only feel opposing when insecurity dominates. True friendship flourishes when both individuals are anchored internally. There is space for growth without fear. There is encouragement without jealousy. There is honesty without subtle hostility. In that space, neither person needs to win. Both can evolve without threatening the other's identity. If you examine your relationships through this lens, clarity will emerge. Where there is constant tension, insecurity is present. Where there is calm, mutual respect, security is present. You cannot force someone to become secure, but you can cultivate it within yourself. And when you do, something remarkable happens. Competition no longer disturbs you. You stop scanning for signs of rivalry. You stop overanalyzing subtle behavior. You move through friendship with confidence rather than suspicion. Some connections will deepen because they are rooted in security. Others will fade because they relied on imbalance. That is not loss. That is refinement. The highest form of friendship is not built on shared status, shared struggle, or shared comparison. It is built on two secure individuals choosing connection freely, without needing to be above or below each other. When you reach that level of security, hidden competition loses its power over you, and what remains is something far stronger than rivalry. It is peace. 10. Let your success be quiet and your mind be untouched. At the end of everything, after you understand comparison, ego, insecurity, attachment, growth, misalignment, and inner security, one final discipline remains. Restraint. Not suppression. Not fear. Restraint. There is a reason hidden competition grows stronger in some friendships. It is often fueled unintentionally, not always by arrogance, but by display, by constant updates, by subtle signaling, by the need to be seen progressing. In a world where people announce every achievement, every improvement, every milestone, the ego feeds not only on being ahead, but on being witnessed ahead. But Buddhism repeatedly emphasizes something different: quiet strength. If you truly understand the danger of ego in friendship, you will begin to value privacy over performance. You will grow without narrating every step. You will succeed without needing constant applause. You will improve without turning your life into a broadcast. This is not about hiding your light. It is about not weaponizing it. There is a subtle difference between sharing joy and showcasing superiority, between gratitude and validation seeking, between confidence and quiet dominance. If a friend is insecure, excessive display will intensify rivalry. That does not mean you are responsible for their insecurity, but wisdom includes awareness of how energy moves. The more you project "I am ahead," the more fragile egos react. The stronger your need to be recognized, the more you unconsciously participate in comparison. Ask yourself honestly, do you want to grow, or do you want to be seen growing? Do you want peace, or do you want position? The ego confuses visibility with value, but value does not require visibility. In fact, some of the most stable people are those who build quietly. They move in silence. They act without announcement. They achieve without commentary, because their satisfaction comes from alignment, not attention. When you adopt this mindset, something shifts in your relationships. You stop creating unnecessary tension. You stop triggering insecure dynamics. You stop giving others material to compare against. You simply live. This does not mean shrinking. It means detaching from the need to perform progress. Hidden competition often escalates because both parties are subtly signaling status. One buys something new, the other upgrades too. One mentions an accomplishment, the other counters with theirs. It becomes a rhythm. But when you step out of that rhythm, the energy changes. You listen more than you announce. You acknowledge without competing. You respond without one-upping. You succeed without broadcasting. The Buddhist principle of right speech is relevant here. Speak what is necessary, beneficial, and true, not what feeds ego. If sharing something creates more comparison than connection, consider whether it needs to be shared. Silence is power when it comes from confidence. There is a quiet dignity in letting results speak over time rather than demanding recognition immediately. And here is something deeper. When your mind becomes untouched by competition, you no longer need to manage how others perceive you. If they think you are ahead, it does not inflate you. If they think you are behind, it does not diminish you. If they compete, you remain neutral. If they celebrate, you remain grateful but grounded. That steadiness is rare. Most people are pulled by perception. They rise and fall emotionally based on how others respond. But when you detach from the need to win socially, you become unshakable. Hidden competition cannot destabilize someone who is not playing. Your friend may still measure. Your friend may still compare. Your friend may still try to assert subtle superiority. But without your participation, the dynamic weakens. And if it does not weaken, it exposes itself clearly. Either way, you remain calm. This is the final maturity in friendship. You stop trying to control outcomes. You stop trying to prove worth. You stop trying to maintain status. You focus on character. Character does not compete. It simply exists. When your character is strong, your success becomes secondary. Your presence becomes steady. Your energy becomes non-threatening. And ironically, the more grounded you are, the less rivalry follows you. Because insecure people are often triggered by those who radiate comparison energy, when that energy disappears, so does much of the friction. Let your success be quiet. Let your discipline be private. Let your progress unfold without constant announcement. And most importantly, let your mind remain untouched. Untouched by jealousy. Untouched by provocation. Untouched by subtle rivalry. If someone competes with you, observe it. If someone distances themselves because you grew, accept it. If someone celebrates you genuinely, cherish it. But do not let any of it disturb your center, because the greatest protection against hidden competition is internal stillness. When your worth is not negotiated externally, nothing can destabilize it. Not praise, not comparison, not rivalry. That is the final lesson. Grow quietly, stand steadily, and let peace, not position, define you. Hidden competition in friendship is not a dramatic explosion. It is subtle. It is quiet. It lives in glances, tones, comparisons, and unspoken tension. And if you are unaware, it slowly disturbs your peace. But the real danger was never your friend. It was unconscious ego. It was attachment to identity. It was the need to be ahead. It was insecurity reacting to growth. It was comparison turning connection into a scoreboard. When you understand this, everything changes. You stop personalizing subtle rivalry. You stop reacting defensively. You stop trying to win. You stop shrinking to keep others comfortable. Instead, you observe. You detach. You refine your circle. And most importantly, you examine yourself. Because the ultimate Buddhist warning is not, beware of competitive friends. It is this, beware of the ego that wants to compete back. If you conquer that, you are free. Free to grow without arrogance. Free to succeed without broadcasting. Free to celebrate others without jealousy. Free to walk away without bitterness. Some friendships will deepen when you evolve. Some will fade when you outgrow the dynamic. Both outcomes are natural. Impermanence is not loss, it is alignment. You do not need everyone to stay. You do not need to prove your position. You do not need to defend your light. You need clarity. You need discipline. You need inner security. When your mind is steady, no hidden competition can disturb you. And when you no longer measure your worth against anyone, rivalry disappears completely. That is peace. And peace is worth more than winning.